Hello and welcome to episode 167 of On Record PR, where we dive into the strategies and insights that matter most to law firm leaders. I'm Jennifer Simpson Carr, Vice President of Strategic Development at Rubel Communications, and today I am here with Gina Rubel.
Hi, everybody.
So, Gina, it is Monday, March 3rd, and we're here to talk about a major story that has serious implications for lawyers, law firms, and the rule of law itself. The sitting president has recently signed an executive order targeting a single law firm, Covington and Burling, for representing special counsel Jack Smith. Um, I thought we could talk a little bit about that and then dive into what happens when law firms become political targets.
So, Jen, when I was preparing for this call, I thought, or this call, well, we're doing the podcast via a call. Can tell where my brain is today. I was really thinking about this order, which revoked the security clearance of the attorneys of the Covington law firm. And it appears to be a punitive action arising from their representation of Jack Smith, who had led the two investigations against Donald Trump for his role in January 6, 2021, which is better known as the insurrection, and his handling of classified documents. And I just want our listeners to be clear that Jack Smith was the person whose investigations led to two indictments or various indictments in both cases. So it's not just an investigator. And what's really scary here is this is it's unprecedented, and it raises huge concerns about government retaliation, legal ethics, and the future of independent legal representation. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I think it was just last Monday or Tuesday. I think it was last Monday when the order came out, and I was down at a College of Law Practice Management conference in DC. And it's all I could think about is this is insane. You know, I'm sure you've been hearing a lot from clients as well, but it's so unprecedented, and it's really, to some extent, invalidated everything I learned in law school. And I'm really struggling to wrap my head around this executive order.
Yeah, it's been scary. From my perspective, I mean, watching the news and for someone who's not an attorney, and my understanding of the rule of law and our legal system, I've been really curious and interested to talk to you who has practiced law, right? A third generation attorney who has practiced law, who intimately understands the legal issues and now advises law firms and legal leaders on communications and strategies around global and political issues, but now one really targeting the work that is done by these incredible professionals every day.
Well, you know, I'm going to have to say that as somebody who does advises, as you know, as a member of a team who advises law firms globally, it's really important that we stand up and say we do not at all support this executive order. And in fact, I am a longtime member and have chaired many committees for the Philadelphia Bar Association, and I've been on the Board of Governors. And their current president, Katiun Jafari, came out with a statement that, if it's okay, I'd like to read some of it, because it's really where I think all bar associations should be standing up for the rule of law, but also all lawyers. So just, I'm going to read this quickly, Jennifer, and I hope that we can put a link in the show notes. But the actions of Trump's administration are directly in conflict with the mission of the Philadelphia Bar Association, and as far as I'm concerned, with all lawyers, and the values of our profession, which include respect for the rule of law, the importance of judicial independence, and the need to advance the fair and equal administration of justice. As judges and attorneys, we commit to supporting and defending the Constitution, No judge or attorney should fear personal or professional retribution for the rulings they make or the clients whom they represent. Let me repeat that. No judge or attorney should fear personal or professional retribution for the rulings they make or the clients whom they represent. These attacks are also dangerous in that they erode public trust in the justice system, which is essential to its ability to function effectively in our society as a whole. This is so unprecedented. I was sitting at the dinner table this weekend talking to some friends, and I said, I don't know how to advise law students. I don't know how law schools are going to advise and educate law students about the current Constitution and fairness, jurisprudence, equity, because it doesn't exist under this administration. And we were founded on a systems of checks and balances to make sure that no single branch could go and pull a stunt like this. And now the administration is basically eroding the rule of law completely, which is it's under threat.
So so let's talk about that for a minute because what we understand is a majority of our listeners are law firm leaders, people who have a seat at the table and make decisions within their firms. And they're charged with really making some of the most important decisions their firm faces every day. And
Absolutely.
so the understanding is that everyone in this country has the right to representation,
Fair
whether they,
representation, exactly. Yes,
and
everyone
so
does.
let's talk about why this executive order matters and how the rule of law is under threat.
Well, so number one, the ability of lawyers to represent clients without fear of government retaliation is a fundamental pillar of democracy. It's one of the reasons we go to law school, those of us who have entered the practice. The executive order sets a really dangerous precedent by penalizing the law firm for taking on a client that the current sitting president dislikes. So it does appear as retribution. And regardless of political affiliation, we all need to be concerned when the government takes or targets legal professionals for simply doing their jobs. I mean, if you look at who Jack Smith was, he was in the United States Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney. And then he was the acting U.S. attorney and head of the department's public integrity section. He was appointed as special counsel to do these investigations. That was his job. And he did it, and he did it well. And now he and the rest of the law firm that he works for are under scrutiny. And that just, my mind is blown on this one.
Yeah, it's been really hard to wrap my head around. And the coverage has been fairly consistent. And it was nice to see the public statements that have come out, um, you know, in support of the rule of law. And
Absolutely.
so let's pause here for a message from our sponsor, and then we get back. Let's talk about the effects on law firms' legal representation and professional responsibility.
Sounds great.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
So, Gina, we're back from our sponsor message, and let's talk a little bit about the effect on law firms and legal representation, particularly the role that law firms play in public interest and in government accountability.
So, Jen, every size law firm, um, including big law, play a crucial role in public interest litigation and government accountability. Um, In fact, even some smaller law firms, like, one of our clients, Willig Williams and Davidson, their managing partner signed as the first woman chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association. Deb Willig signed on the Philadelphia Bar Association statement along with many former chancellors. And these are, as a small firm, and we have many big firms that we represent, many of them are very actively involved in public interest litigation. And so the fear of losing government contracts, security clearances, or facing political retribution could actually cause some of these firms to refuse cases that challenge those in power. And what scares me, and the reason I say could, is because we've already seen a number of firms scale back their DE&I programs. We've seen one law firm that I'm not going to mention come out and say they're a MAGA firm. So it does pose a risk, and especially if the executive committee decides to go that route, it's also going to pose a risk to the law firms and the retention of great attorneys if they do that. And also could lead to fewer lawyers willing to defend politically targeted individuals or institutions, which in and of itself weakens the justice system. So it's a huge problem.
It's really hard to understand or I guess comprehend that a law firm will now have to weigh potentially whether or not they will provide representation based on potential retaliation. I've only been in the industry a little under 20 years and could have never, one could have never anticipated that this is something that we would be dealing with um, in our industry.
No, and it's not just limited to special prosecutors, for example. And the reason why I'm somewhat being careful of what I say is because we've actually had to counsel clients in matters that relate to those things and whether or not they should take on those cases and why they should or shouldn't. And again, it comes down to, and if we were to ever tell a client they shouldn't, it's because the firm itself doesn't work in that area particularly, as opposed to everybody deserves great representation. So I am being a little bit careful with my words because, all of our cases and everything we work on has an NDA.
Of course. So you mentioned earlier a call to law firms and legal professionals to speak out. What what do you consider professional responsibility to push back on in such an area that really looks like a very slippery slope?
Well, first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to give a caveat here. And the caveat is anything you say publicly, even if it's just in your firm, just assume that it'll be a public statement. And the reason I said that first is because I believe that lawyers and law firms must defend the independence of the legal system, even when it's politically uncomfortable. And it's important that the first step be that law firm management, the leaders need to say something to the lawyers and staff. So an internal statement that we will continue to represent X, Y, and Z is very important because lawyers and staff, and when I say staff, I'm talking about professionals, legal professionals, need to know that they can count on the law firms for doing the right thing. The legal community, also including bar associations and law firm leaders, should continue to publicly condemn actions that undermine attorney-client relationships. What's interesting is I said something on my personal Facebook, and there's been a lot of conversation about it. And a lawyer reached out to me and said, "Thank you for being public about your personal position on this matter, because we know it's, as a PR and crisis agency, some firms might not feel the same way." And my response to that individual, and thank you if you're listening, individual, I'm not going to call you out by name. But my response was, that the law firms we represent believe in the rule of law and the current legal system. And that I know for a fact. And thirdly, if law firms remain silent now, if they remain silent now, they really may regret it when the legal system no longer functions as a fair and independent check on power. And this is what this is all about. It's about power, and it's about intimidation, and it's about bullying. And if we don't stand up now, we're going to be in big trouble.
So, Gina, before we conclude our time together, are there any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
I think what's most important is that lawyers and law firms speak out, because silence enables further erosion of legal protections, and everyone deserves representation. I urge the Bar Association's legal ethics boards, one of which I sat on for 6 years, and the judiciary, to take a stand against intimidation of legal professionals. And I want to remind listeners that the rule of law is not self-sustaining. It requires constant defense, especially in moments like this. So, and obviously we're always here to help in drafting any statements of a client and things like that. But this is not, our podcast isn't about, telling people to call us. It is about issues. It's about what can be being done differently and what should be being done differently. And really protecting law firms and the industry.
Yeah, I know that our goal is to show up every day and every conversation with integrity. And so I know that that was our goal for today's conversation as well. I
Absolutely.
want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us now on YouTube for the full video episode. If you have enjoyed this conversation, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. And please share your ideas for topics with us at podcast@onrecordpr.com. Last week, we released an episode on public statements. And so Gina mentioned earlier, if there are questions about public statements, we will link to that episode. It is a wealth of information about how to consider public statements and how to craft them. And then Gina, you also mentioned something that we'll be covering next week, which is how law firms should be considering the attack on DE&I. So next week's episode on Monday will cover assessing risk tolerance and also an internal impact assessment. So tune in next week for more information on that. Thank you to our listeners, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Jennifer.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.